The city rose each morning like a drumbeat that never ceased. Beneath the glass towers that reflected ambition and wealth, the streets carried the rhythm of old traditions. Elders whispered wisdom from open windows, and children raced between stalls that smelled of kola nuts, dried fish, and fresh bread. The city watched quietly, a living presence, holding memories of every smile and every slight. Every corner, every dusty path, seemed to remember how people treated one another, as if the city itself passed judgment silently. In the heart of this city lived a young woman named Amara. Her hands were calloused from work, her heart tempered by patience. Raised in a modest home where laughter often mingled with the scent of cooking fires, she learned early that kindness and diligence were the true measures of a person. Each day she carried her family's hopes on her shoulders, giving without expectation and helping without hesitation. Yet the very qualities that made her gentle and loyal also left her exposed. Neighbors whispered when she walked past, friends offered smiles that felt distant, and strangers judged with eyes that cut sharper than knives. Her goodness was visible only to pain, a cruel irony that the city seemed to acknowledge in its own silent way. The whispers began softly, the way leaves murmur in a breeze, but soon became a chorus she could not ignore. "See how she struggles with her weight," some would say under their breath. "Always kind, yet always alone." Laughter sometimes followed in corners, but often the silence spoke louder. Every glance felt like a ledger of her worth, measured not by the heart she carried but by the shape her body took in the eyes of others. The market stalls hummed with life. Women called out prices, voices carrying stories as old as the city itself, while men in polished shoes walked quickly as though outrunning memory. Amara moved among them, carrying baskets and baskets of produce, her back straight, her face calm. Yet inside, each look and judgment left tiny scratches across her spirit. The city remembered. It remembered the sharpness of eyes, the sting of whispered jokes, and the quiet dignity she carried through it all. At night, when the drums of the distant neighborhood played faintly, she would sit on her small veranda and listen. The city seemed to exhale, as if reminding her that her path, though burdened by mockery, was watched, recorded, and not forgotten. Here, beneath the glass towers and the pounding ambitions, the old rhythms of patience and endurance still beat, calling her to keep walking, keep giving, keep existing with quiet strength, no matter the world's cruelty. Her name in the mouths of some had become nothing more than the shape she carried, a single attribute that others used to define her. But within the city's memory, and within her own heart, Amara remained whole, a living testament to the truth that dignity and patience are the silent armor of those who endure. He moved through the city like a shadow chasing its reflection. His name was Kofi, a young man with ambition in his eyes sharper than the morning sun on glass towers. Every step he took was measured, calculated, as if the city itself were a ladder he had to climb without stumbling. The streets whispered of his status, and he feared the weight of anything that might slow his rise. "People will see you, Kofi. They will judge every misstep," his friend Tay warned one evening over the hum of the market below. "I cannot fall behind, Tay," Kofi replied, his voice tight, a mix of pride and panic. "Even the smallest flaw, the tiniest weakness, can ruin a man here." At home, Amara waited. She carried meals, smiles, and quiet encouragement like a shield against the world's sharp edges. She asked little, gave much, and loved with a heart that bled for his success. But each gesture she offered seemed to fade before his ambition, each sacrifice leaving her more invisible than the day before. "You look tired," she said one night, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "I am fine," he answered, pulling away. "There is work to be done, people to impress. You wouldn't understand." She understood. She always understood. And yet, his distance grew. Friends' voices carried through the city like poison. Comparisons, gossip, images of women thinner, more fashionable, more desirable in the eyes of the world. Screens flickered endlessly, showing him what he might gain, or lose, by staying tethered to someone ordinary in a city that worshipped beauty and success above all. The first wound opened slowly, almost imperceptibly. Until one evening, words sharper than a hunter's knife cut her heart in half. "You've changed. Not for the better," he said, his tone casual but final. I can't be seen with you like this." Her world narrowed. Betrayal did not wait for explanation. Mercy had left the room before he spoke. The laughter and whispers of friends, the approving nods to others, filled the space where love had once lived. By the next morning, the streets themselves carried her humiliation. The market women whispered as she passed. Children repeated words they had overheard, like echoes in an empty hall. Even the city seemed to lean in, watching, remembering how a heart was broken where ambition outweighed loyalty. She walked among them, carrying her shame like a silent drumbeat, each step heavy with betrayal. Eyes followed, yet she felt unseen, as though the city had grown 1,000 watching faces only to make her vanish beneath their gaze. She was present and invisible all at once, her pain private yet known to every corner. At night, she would sit by the window, listening to the distant drums of the neighborhood and the hum of cars below. Her chest tightened, but she breathed. The city had witnessed cruelty, but it had also witnessed her endurance. Somewhere deep within, a seed of quiet strength began to take root, though she could not yet see it. The city did not forget, and it did not forgive. In the markets, the whispers grew like creeping vines, reaching from stall to stall, from street to street. Each word carried the weight of judgment, turning a private wound into public spectacle. "Did you hear what Kofi said?" Women murmured, their voices soft but sharp. Children repeated what they heard, unaware of the pain that words could leave behind. The laughter of some was light, but its echo cut deep, for every jest reminded Amara that the world measured her by the shape of her body, not the kindness in her heart. She moved through the city as if walking in a shadow, each side glance a reminder of how cruel people could be when curiosity and cruelty danced together. Hushed voices followed her steps, lingering in alleys and on crowded streets, marking her presence even when no one dared to speak aloud. The silence around her was heavier than insults, pressing against her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Friends who had once smiled with her, shared secrets, and carried burdens together began to drift away. Invitations stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. Even laughter in her presence seemed guarded, as if they feared to be associated with someone now considered lesser in the eyes of the city. At home, the struggle continued. Her family, torn between love and fear of society's gaze, offered gentle advice with anxious eyes. "Perhaps, if you dress differently, if you change a little, people will take you more seriously," her aunt suggested, words meant to help but that cut like a thorn hidden in soft velvet. Marriage, respect, and acceptance had become entangled with appearance, and tradition seemed to falter under the relentless pressure of modern judgment. Amara nodded, listening, but inside she felt the tension of two worlds pulling her apart: love that demanded patience and society that demanded conformity. Amidst this storm of voices, the elders of her community spoke with the slow certainty of those who had seen many seasons pass. "Child," one elder said, leaning on a carved walking stick, "the city may praise what is empty and mock what is true, but a heart rooted in patience and honor will endure. Outer beauty fades, but the soul, the kindness, and the wisdom you carry are eternal." Another nodded, adding, "Walk with your head high, Amara. Let the city see your patience, your inner strength. Let them measure your worth by what is inside, not by the fleeting shadow of the world's eyes." Her heart, though bruised, absorbed the words like water into dry soil. In the quiet corners of her home, the seeds of wisdom and moral courage began to take root, planted in the fertile ground of her suffering. The city could laugh, the streets could gossip, but she carried something that no whisper, no judgment, no cruel smile could take away: the knowledge that character, patience, and dignity were treasures that no ambition or mockery could ever devalue. The city had a way of bowing only to what glistened and shimmered. Slim bodies passed through the crowded streets, their steps measured, their hair and clothes reflecting the sun like polished gold. Shops displayed wealth as if it were holy, and eyes followed only those who fit the city's harsh definition of beauty. Amara walked among them, invisible yet painfully visible, each glance a silent judgment, each whisper carving deeper into her soul. Tradition, the steady heartbeat of her ancestors, seemed to fade beneath the neon glare and the relentless rush of modern ambition. The old songs of patience and honor no longer echoed loudly enough to drown out the city's applause for thinness and gold. She paused in front of a tall mirror in a boutique window, and for the first time, the reflection did not comfort her. It stared back with sharp honesty, showing the weight she carried, not just on her body, but in her heart. "Why do you betray me so?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Shame seeped into her bones, self-doubt creeping in like shadows at dusk. Each curve, each line, became a question she could not answer. Who was she if the city refused to see beyond the surface? The mirror, cold and unyielding, seemed to mock her inner struggle, a silent judge reminding her that identity could be both fragile and elusive. Anger rose in her chest, thick and hot, yet it had no outlet. It turned inward, gnawing at her spirit, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Nights passed with her lying awake, heart heavy, hands clenched, staring at the ceiling as if the city itself might hear her silent cries. She suffered quietly, alone, with no one to share the weight of the betrayal she carried, not only from love lost, but from the world that had conspired to remind her she was not enough. Even love had deceived her. Kofi's rejection had been cruel, but the city's laughter made the wound deeper. Words traveled faster than wind through the markets, spreading like fire through the dry grasses of gossip. Faces she once smiled at now whispered, pointing fingers with barely hidden smirks. Trust, once carefully nurtured, had shattered beyond repair, leaving her with an ache not easily named, a fracture that cut deeper than any blade. The streets themselves seemed to shrink with every step. Alleys that once felt ordinary now loomed like walls pressing in from all sides. Every turn reminded her of judgment, every crowded corner amplified her fear. The bustling city, full of opportunity and life, had become a maze of entrapment, each pathway lined with the invisible chains of scrutiny and expectation. Meanwhile, he rose. Kofi walked with a new air of confidence, lifted by applause, empty praise, and admiration from those who valued appearances over substance. Women smiled at his words, men nodded approvingly at his accomplishments, and the city seemed to validate his ascent. Yet, beneath the glittering surface, the hollow echo of shallow triumph followed him. Every smile that greeted him, every congratulation whispered in his ear, was a reminder of what he had chosen over love, and the emptiness of his success began to shimmer like a mirage. He moved through the city like a king without a kingdom, smiling at women whose faces and bodies the city had already crowned. They laughed at his jokes, leaned into his charm, admired the shine of his clothes and the sparkle of his watch. Yet beneath the applause and the shallow smiles, a hollowness followed him. Nights came and went, but the bed beside him felt colder than any rejection. His confidence was loud, his heart empty. Every compliment he collected from the world was a mirror of his own moral imbalance, a reflection of choices made and love abandoned. Meanwhile, she walked in the opposite rhythm of the same city. Where he ascended in noise and brightness, she sank quietly into shadow and silence. Streets she once knew felt narrower, crowded with faces that could not see her pain, yet every step carried the weight of judgment. Fate, like an invisible drum, beat differently for each of them, his path upward, hers inward, yet in the stillness, the tide of destiny quietly shifted. Her fall was long, unrelenting. Each day stripped away illusions, each night tore away the comfort of dreams built on someone else's approval. Tears fell as freely as rain from the African sky, soaking her spirit until clarity emerged like a lone fire in the darkness. She realized, in that quiet devastation, that the world's cruelty had no power over her essence. Only she could decide the worth of her own soul. "I will not let this city or him decide who I am," she whispered to the wind, letting the words fall like seeds into the dry earth of her heart. She chose herself, her dignity, her future, not out of revenge, but out of necessity, out of the respect she owed herself. Anger softened into resolve, sorrow hardened into a quiet, unshakable strength. The shadow of betrayal lingered, yes, heavy and long, but it was now a teacher rather than a tormentor. With a steady breath, she stepped away from the streets that had known her suffering. Market stalls and gossiping neighbors faded behind her, replaced by silence that wrapped her like a cloak. Each step carried intention, each glance forward carried possibility. She sought a new space, where no one whispered of her past, where her name had no echoes of humiliation. Here, in this quiet place, she could finally breathe, think, and become. In the stillness of her solitude, the city could not touch her. Here, the eyes of others had no weight, the whispers had no power, and the judgments bounced off her like rain from the roof of a strong hut. In anonymity, she discovered freedom. In quiet reflection, she discovered herself. The woman who once bowed to the city's shallow rhythms now began to beat her own drum, slow and steady, carrying the rhythm of a heart unbroken, a spirit unbent, a life ready to rise again. She stood at the edge of the quiet courtyard, where the sun kissed the red earth and the shadows of the baobab trees danced slowly across the walls. The woman who had trembled under whispers, who had bowed to judgment and hid her tears in the market's corners, was no longer here. She lifted her head and whispered to herself, "I leave behind the fear that once weighed my spirit. I shed the shame that strangers pressed upon me. I bury the woman I was, so the woman I must be can rise. Morning found her awake before the city stirred. Her feet traced the dusted paths with purpose, her hands steady and deliberate. Each day followed a rhythm she alone dictated, stretching muscles before the sun, measuring steps with intention, repeating actions that built her body, yes, but more importantly, built her resolve. Comfort was a stranger, discipline her new companion. She ate not out of indulgence but for strength, she rested not out of sorrow but to ready herself. Each task, each small act of care, became a lifeline, a reminder that change could only be earned, never given. Her reflection in the cracked mirror was a slow revelation. No magic transformed her, only her sweat, her aching limbs, her refusal to surrender to despair. Every pound lost, every stubborn curve reshaped, was a testament to her will. Pain marked her skin and bones as proof, like the fire-tempered iron of the village smith. She learned to respect the process, to honor the labor that made her body and spirit stronger in tandem. Some evenings, exhaustion left her silent and still. Her muscles burned, her lungs gasped, and her mind sought an escape in imagined complaints. But she held the silence, letting it wrap around her like a protective cloak. The pain that once tormented her became her teacher, endurance became her sword. The city, with all its noise and judgment, could not touch her in these moments. Her strength was private, carved in sweat and whispered oaths to herself. Gradually, small victories began to accumulate. She ran longer, lifted heavier, walked taller. Each accomplishment was a quiet drumbeat of affirmation. No one cheered, no one noticed. And yet, the confidence that grew within her chest shone brighter than any public praise. With each step, she reclaimed belief in herself, building an inner validation that no gossip, no judgment, could erase. She discovered the power of saying no. When a neighbor's eyes lingered too long with judgment, she did not flinch. When old friends tempted her to return to habits that had once dulled her spirit, she smiled and refused. Boundaries became her shield, self-respect her banner. Pleasing others no longer defined her, she answered first to herself. In these lessons, she recognized her maturity, the quiet wisdom that pain had written into her bones. By the time the sun dipped low, painting the city in molten gold, she walked with a rhythm all her own. The woman she once was, soft, unsure, bent under the world's weight, lay in the soil behind her. Ahead stretched the path she had carved, each step a vow, each breath a claim to her dignity. The city could watch, could whisper, could remember, but it would not touch the strength that now lived in her silence. She sat beneath the mango tree outside her small, sunlit home, fingers tracing the worn edges of books she had once abandoned. The words seemed to hum now, familiar and awakening. Long-forgotten skills, sewing patterns, ledgers of trade, the secret rhythm of numbers, stirred inside her mind like embers calling to fire. "I can build again," she whispered. "Not for them, not for their praise, but for me. For purpose." The city may have mocked her, but her hands and her mind remembered a power that no gossip could erase. One evening, an elder from her village arrived, leaning on a wooden staff carved with the stories of ancestors. His voice was low, steady, each word carrying centuries of wisdom. "Child," he said, "the river flows as it was taught. You must find your strength in what has never left you. A body may change, but the mind and heart carry the legacy of your forebears. Remember, the tree that bends in the storm still grows tall when the sun returns." She nodded, absorbing every syllable, letting the proverbs guide her choices, shaping each decision with patience and ancestral knowledge. In the quiet hours before dawn, she worked alone, unseen by the bustling city. Her transformation unfolded silently, like a caterpillar slipping into a cocoon, hidden from the eyes that once judged her. Every day she shed doubt and fear, and within that stillness, beauty emerged, not the hollow kind applauded by the city, but deep, undeniable, rooted in resilience. She smiled, for no one had watched this quiet rebirth, and yet it was real. Life tested her again, as it always does, sharpening pain like fire against iron. Each hardship stripped away fear, each setback polished her resolve. She remembered the old proverb, "Iron does not fear the fire, for it knows it will emerge stronger." She allowed the trials to purify her spirit, carrying each scar as a mark of endurance, a lesson etched deep into her character. She began to see herself differently. Strength, discipline, and presence became the new measures of her worth. The shallow standards of beauty the city once enforced no longer touched her. "I am more than their eyes," she murmured. "I am my own." Her reflection no longer frightened her. She saw a woman who had claimed her identity, who refused to bow to hollow applause, who walked with intention and quiet power. The streets she once feared now felt spacious and familiar, no longer arenas of judgment. Her heart moved freely, each step a statement of reclamation. The marketplace's noise, the towering glass of the offices, even the whispers of strangers, they held no sway over her. Confidence reshaped her perception, and the city that had once loomed over her now seemed smaller, pliable to the rhythm she chose. At last, she walked through the city with a calm that had been earned. Her footsteps were no longer borrowed from fear or shaped by expectation. They belonged to her, each one a drumbeat of identity reclaimed. People glanced, perhaps even admired, but it no longer mattered. She had found the quiet victory that could not be stolen, the dignity and strength born from patience, effort, and the lessons of her ancestors. The city moved around her, but she moved in her own time, her own way, and in that movement, she was finally free. The city woke to its usual rhythm, but today, something was different. She walked through the streets she had once feared, her steps quiet yet commanding. The wind carried the scent of freshly baked bread and warm earth, yet it seemed to whisper her return. Each footfall held years of struggle, of nights spent in reflection, of strength carved in silence. No shout, no spectacle, only the rhythm of a woman who had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, far from the eyes that had once judged her. People paused as she passed. The market women, who had once whispered behind their hands, blinked twice, unsure if their eyes deceived them. "Is it her?" one murmured. Children stopped chasing a ball, sensing the quiet authority in her stride. Even the elders nodded from their doorways, recognizing not just the woman before them but the resilience she carried like an invisible crown. The city itself seemed to bend, ever so slightly, to acknowledge a presence that was no longer timid. No one recognized the weight she no longer carried, the shame, the doubt, the old label stitched into her skin by gossip. Her face glowed with the quiet fire of endurance. Her posture, once slumped under society's gaze, now held the dignity of a river cutting its own path through rocks. The dress she wore was simple, yet it spoke of a body and spirit reclaimed. She smiled softly, knowing that the city had measured her by its shallow rules, and she had outgrown them all. Whispers began, tentative at first, then louder, as eyes shifted from suspicion to awe. Where once there had been jokes, now there was silence. Where judgment had crowded the air, disbelief settled like a heavy evening fog. Even the loudest voices faltered. Gossip had no power against the quiet authority of a woman transformed. Heads turned, conversations stilled, and the city seemed to hold its breath. Every gaze, every murmur, reinforced a truth older than the streets themselves. Resilience cannot be mocked, and true power rarely announces itself. She entered a hall that had once been closed to her, a space of polished floors, high ceilings, and the subtle perfume of wealth and influence. The murmur of the room stilled as she stepped across the threshold. Invisible barriers, built over years of social expectation, crumbled at the mere sight of her. Men and women who had once dismissed her now paused, forced to recognize her presence. She did not speak, she did not demand. Her very being, calm, deliberate, radiant, carried justice. The city, which had judged and laughed, now watched as dignity claimed its rightful place. And then he saw her. His eyes met hers across the room, and a flicker of recognition passed through him. Shock, regret, confusion, these emotions tangled across his face as if he had glimpsed a shadow of what he had lost. No words were spoken, none were needed. In that moment, the past and present collided. He realized, perhaps too late, that the laughter he had sought and the approval he had chased could never fill the emptiness within. Meanwhile, she stood there, a living testament to patience, resilience, and self-worth. Her presence alone reversed the roles of power. The city continued its hum, but the air was different. The woman who had walked in silence now walked in authority. No revenge, no spectacle, no cries of triumph, only the quiet, unshakable truth that self-work, dignity, and the reclamation of one's life are victories far deeper than the applause of others. And the streets, once hostile, now seemed to whisper a lesson older than the stones themselves. Strength built in silence cannot be ignored. He stood across the room, a man who had once held the world at his feet, yet now felt it slipping from him. The woman before him moved with a quiet authority that made the air itself pause. He blinked, unprepared for the strength she had grown into, the same hands he once dismissed, the same eyes he once mocked. You've changed," he stammered, voice tight with disbelief. She did not answer, only allowed a small, knowing smile to touch her lips. It was not pride, nor mockery. It was the calm of one who had weathered storms no applause could measure. In that silence, he felt the first crack of his own arrogance. The laughter and admiration he had once chased could not fill the emptiness he now saw reflected in her composed gaze. Around her, respect gathered like a crown, invisible but undeniable. Elders nodded from the corners of the room, colleagues whispered in admiration, and even strangers paused to acknowledge her presence. The city's shallow judgments had no claim here. Power, once assumed by him, had quietly shifted. Every step she took, deliberate and graceful, marked the reclamation of what society had tried to steal: dignity, strength, and presence. Her body language spoke louder than any word. She leaned slightly, stood tall, and moved with ease, every motion a lesson in quiet authority. People noticed, even those who had never known her. Strength had found a voice in her very being. He could not ignore it, could not challenge it. Silence had become her shield, her statement, her sovereignty. Yet beneath the calm, her heart remembered the pain. Memories of whispered insults, cruel laughter, and empty promises stirred faint echoes. She felt them, acknowledged them, but did not falter. Each recollection was a reminder of her endurance, each shadow of the past a measure of the woman she had become. Her emotional restraint carried the weight of her journey, proving that resilience need not shout to be heard. He staggered under the weight of what he had thrown away. The women he now admired, the applause he now chased, they filled the space around him, but left the hollow center untouched. The regret settled into his chest, heavy and insistent. He had once measured worth by appearances, by approval, and by conformity, but she had built something deeper. Justice, he realized too late, had already unfolded. And still, she did not speak. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand vengeance. There was no confrontation, no show of power, no pleading for recognition. In the quiet, she towered above the petty judgments and shallow accolades. Her triumph lay in restraint, in dignity, in the subtle authority of a life reclaimed. The moral of the tale was clear to all who watched. Strength, patience, and self-work yield victories far greater than any revenge. The city held its breath as she entered the hall, every step deliberate, every motion a quiet declaration. She did not raise her voice, did not call for attention, yet the power of her presence spoke louder than 100 proclamations. Those who had once whispered, laughed, or judged felt a shift in the air, as if the streets themselves were bending toward her. Justice had arrived, not through confrontation, but by the strength of transformation. He watched, his chest tightening, a man unprepared for the woman she had become. He saw respect gather around her like a silent crown, whispers of admiration replacing the jeers he once encouraged. The city, in its silent way, acknowledged her victory. Pride had been humbled. Power, quietly reclaimed, now belonged to her. She paused before the mirror, a reflection of the girl she had once been staring back at her. The pain, the humiliation, the endless nights of doubt, all lay behind her. "I forgive you, old self," she murmured softly. "I forgive myself for believing their lies, for shrinking to fit their world." A weight lifted from her chest, as if the anger she carried had been old skin finally shedding, leaving room for light and freedom. Beyond the walls, the city watched and learned. Eyes that had once gleamed with judgment now softened with recognition. Mothers, daughters, and neighbors whispered among themselves, feeling the lesson in their hearts: cruelty is not without consequence. The laughter of mockery, once so easy, now echoed back as a reminder of loss, of respect withheld, and the hollowness of shallow pride. At last, he understood too late. True beauty, the strength born of resilience, the dignity forged in silence, had arrived, and it required no applause. The cost of betrayal, the emptiness of vanity, and the weight of his actions pressed down upon him. The woman before him carried nothing but grace, yet it held the sharpest justice. She turned her face to the sunlit streets, feeling the warmth on her skin, the weight of her own choices in her hands. The world could no longer measure her. She chose herself over every shallow praise, every fleeting admiration. Her foundation was built on self-worth, and nothing could shake it. Days passed, and her life unfolded not with the chaos of revenge, but with the steady rhythm of purpose. She worked, learned, and grew. Every decision carved a path of peace and meaning. Where once turmoil had ruled, harmony now thrived. The city moved around her, still alive, still bustling, yet forever altered by the quiet power of one woman who had endured, transformed, and reclaimed herself. And so, the tale closed, not with a shout, not with spectacle, but with dignity, resilience, and the eternal echo of wisdom. Those who had mocked understood that night. Appearances fade, cruelty returns to its owner, and true victory belongs to those who walk in the silence of their own strength. He sat alone in his high-rise apartment, the city lights stretching endlessly beneath him. The laughter and applause that had once filled his evenings now sounded hollow, like wind moving through an empty drum. His hands rested on the table, tracing invisible patterns, as the reality of what he had lost pressed against him. I thought I was winning, he murmured to himself, voice brittle. I thought admiration was enough. But she's gone, and all I have is this emptiness. Even as he spoke, the memory of her loyalty, her kindness, and the quiet strength she had carried lingered in the corners of the room. Faces he had once admired, the women he had pursued, the friends who had cheered him on, now seemed shallow, hollow reflections of success that had never truly mattered. Pride, once unshakable, began to crack. Outside, the city whispered. Markets that had buzzed with gossip now seemed quieter, the people moving through streets with a slower awareness, sensing the lesson that had quietly arrived. Mothers shook their heads, and young women whispered among themselves, realizing that the laughter they had shared at her expense carried a weight of consequence. In hushed tones, the community began to measure worth differently. "It is not the shape of a woman that defines her," an elder murmured to a child, "nor the wealth a man wears upon his shoulders. Character endures when beauty fades, and pride crumbles when tested by truth." The man felt it keenly, this silent judgment of reality. He looked down at the city, feeling the echo of every careless word, every cruel jest he had enabled. "She has changed," he whispered. "And I am left to count regrets." The streets themselves seemed to agree, teaching without voice. People reconsidered their standards, measuring not by the shimmer of wealth or the allure of slenderness, but by the depth of honor and strength of character. Those who had mocked learned that ridicule has a price, and those who sought shortcuts to admiration discovered the emptiness of shallow victory. Meanwhile, she moved through the city with quiet confidence. Every step she took left a trace, not of vengeance, but of undeniable self-worth. Heads turned, not in mockery, but in recognition. Streets that had once confined her with judgment now felt like stages for her resilience. And the city, in its endless hum, absorbed the lesson. Transformation does not require revenge. True power comes from the work done in silence, the dignity reclaimed, and the self-worth embraced. The moral was clear: beauty fades, pride falters, but integrity remains eternal. Even he, left in solitude, could not escape it. The weight of what he had thrown away rested upon him like a shadow, a reminder that consequences always follow cruelty. The woman he had dismissed now stood taller in the story of the city than he ever would. She walked on, each step a quiet drumbeat of victory, her presence echoing through alleyways and avenues, leaving a story for all to remember. And the city moved forward, changed, carrying the moral in whispers, in reflections, and in the knowledge that character endures where appearance fails.